Well, that's our next step, is configure what the drone does when it gets these signals from the radio. So in order to do that, we're going to have to actually connect to the flight controller with Mission Planner. Now, for this particular flight controller board, it's underpowered if you only plug it into the USB cable of the computer. So if you plug the flight control board into the computer with a USB, it'll power up the microcontroller, but it doesn't have enough power to run the barometer, the GPS, and the radio. So we, at this point, have to give the flight controller a battery power, which you should have soldered by now. If you haven't, then you need to stop, go solder the battery leads on so that we can use the battery as power. So I'm going to plug the battery in and do this with props off, because now we're arming and disarming and we're changing the configuration. We don't want it to arm and fly away, or more common is it arms and it cuts your finger on the bench because you're messing around with a computer and the props are on it and you're changing the arm and disarm condition. It's uncertain whether it's armed or disarmed, and all of a sudden it throttles up and you cut your finger. We don't want that. So take the props off. Don't ask me how I know. Okay.
Telemetry connected.
So I just plugged the drone in to the battery, and it's making all its beeping, and the radio said it's connected. And the green solid light is on the receiver. So all those things say the drone is connected. And the drone is doing all sorts of beeping, which we'll go over in a future video. So now we want to confirm that. So if I had the props on now, I could arm it and fly it. But don't do that unless you're sure it's configured properly for safety reasons. So the props are off, and we need to configure what the drone does in response to all the different buttons on the radio. So that's our next step. So plug the radio receiver into the flight controller. We did that. Power on the flight controller. We did that. Oops. I want this. Connect to Mission Planner. Okay. So we have Mission Planner from our last video. And we're not connected yet. And okay, so I need to plug the drone in. Let's plug the flight controller into the computer via USB. Windows dings. We can look under Device Manager. Ardu Pilot Com5, all is well in the world. So we want to connect with Mission Planner. You can do auto here, or it recognized Com5, and 9600 baud is just too slow for me. If we're using a good USB cable, then 115K is a lot better. So let's click connect. Okay. And if I move the drone around, you see the artificial horizon change. So the drone flight controller is connected to Mission Planner. Let's see what's going on with the radio. So the directions are here. Go to the Setup tab, Mandatory Hardware, Radio, wiggle the sticks. So we'll go to Mission Planner, Setup tab, Mandatory Hardware, Radio, wiggle the sticks. So now I'm wiggling the sticks. Uh-oh. Something doesn't seem quite right there, but there's a throttle. So it seems like the pitch, the roll, if I move the stick to the right, the bar goes to the right. The pitch, if I move the stick forward, the pitch goes down, which I think is the wrong sign. So I'll have to check that later. The yaw, left, right, works, throttle, full throttle, no throttle. Okay. Now, Express LRS doesn't have a lot of channels. Other protocols have many channels. Express LRS is a lean, mean radio protocol. It's meant for very long range, but it doesn't have a lot of channels. So we only have, I think, channel 4 through 8. So I can press the button A. No, nothing happened.
Loiter. Return to home. Loiter.
Button
Stabilize
B
mode.
moves radio
Loiter.
6.
Return to home. Stabilize
Button
mode.
C moves
Armed.
radio 7.
Disarmed.
Button D moves radio 8. Some reason button. Oh, there we go. Radio 5. Okay. So that confirms that our radio is connected to the flight controller over the airwaves, and the flight controller is receiving information from the radio controller. Great. So the roll, throttle, pitch, and yaw you need to check. And like I said, I think the pitch is wrong on the sign here. Maybe it's right. So we'll leave that as unsolved for now. But the other ones are correct, especially throttle, full throttle, zero throttle. And these are PWM interpreted signals, pulse width modulation, internal to the system we're using. In the old days, to control the direction of a servo, you would send out a series of pulses on the line from the controller to the servo. It's called pulse width modulation because the width of the pulse was between 1,000 and 2,000 microseconds, and they were repeated at something like a kilohertz. And every time the servo received a pulse, it measured the width, and that determined the deflection of the servo. Here, it's more virtual, but we still use 1,000 to 2,000 as the range. Okay, so good. We have those four controlled. Now let's go to the next one. So we have pitch, yaw, roll, throttle done, with a possible exception that the pitch may be the wrong sign. We can reverse that in the software if we need to later. Okay, now let's do button 6. Radio 6. So this is the left button.
Return to home. Loiter.
It's moving
Stabilize
radio
mode.
6 between
Return to home.
999,
Loiter.
1500, and 2000. Be quiet. Okay, so now we want to change the flight mode. So we go back to the config tab. Oh, now we get to the fun part. So we go to the configuration tab, full parameter list. These are all the parameters of ArduPilot. And I've updated them since our last video in response to this, some of the sign issues that we face. So let's actually get the latest one from the course website. Ooh, I hope it's there. It's not there. Okay. I'm going to pause the video because I need to put that new one there. So let me pause the video. I'm going to actually stop it because we're at 25 minutes, and then we'll start a new video so the file doesn't get too big. So stand by. Okay, we're back. Continuing. So what we're doing is configuring what the drone does in response to the radio inputs. So here's the radio connected to the drone plugged into the computer via USB cable, mission planner interacting with the drone and seeing what the drone is seeing. So that's what the drone is seeing. And now let's see, in mission planner, we have the 4 main controls for the joysticks figured out, and we want to figure out the arm, disarm, and the flight mode button. So we're starting with the flight mode button, which gives radio 6 change. Okay, so how do we do that? We do that by going to the configure tab. Stand by. Yeah, I'm going to just arm it real quick. If you don't arm it, the motors start to beep. It assumes that it's lost in the bushes somewhere and it beeps so you can find it. So we just arm it and it stops beeping. Okay, so full parameter list. These are all the parameters. And like I said, I've changed the parameter list last night. So it's in the course website. And previously it was from 24 August, and I just uploaded a new one. I'm going to refresh this page So I have a new one, 27 August, that I want to use instead because it's an updated version with correct parameters. The old one had incorrect parameters for the arm, disarm, etc. But we're going to check it just to make sure. And your responsibility as pilot is to check everything before you fly. So this is the parameter list. I'm providing it to you as a convenience, but you have to check everything. I'm going to show you how to check it. So we're going to load from file the new one from 27 August that we downloaded from the website. It said the boot time is different, of course. And now we're going to write those to the drone. Click yes, and they've saved. So now reboot is required. So let's do Control F, reboot the flight controller instead of power cycling it. Because if you power cycle it, you have to disconnect the battery and the USB. So isn't it easier just to press a button? So now it completely rebooted. So now we want to configure the flight mode, which is radio channel 6. So we go to Configure tab, full parameter list, find the flight mode group, expand it, click on the flight mode channel, confirm it is set to 6. All right, let's see if we can do that. So we go to Configure, full parameter list, scroll down to the flight mode group, open it, select flight mode channel. The value is 6, so that's correct. That means that channel 6 is controlling the flight mode. Okay, we did that. Now we need to go back to the Setup tab and check the flight modes. So we go back to the Setup tab, flight modes. So these are all the modes. Now we only have a 3-position switch. These are the PWM values that the flight controller is willing to interpret as that mode, which you get to set there. So we only have a 3-position switch. I'm sorry. There are ways to make it 2 switches together, but we're only do it simple now. So we only get to pick 3 modes. So I'm picking stabilize, loiter, and RTL. We'll go over what those mean later. It's pretty obvious. Loiter holds its position based on the GPS. Stabilize just keeps it level. You can fly indoors without GPS. And RTL returns to home automatically. So what is the direction saying? Is move the 3-position switch. All right, so first we have to program it. So let's go here. So you get to pick these. And as you move the 3-position switch, it tells you what the PWM is. So now the PWM is between 1491 and 1620. And we have that set as loiter mode. Stabilize, loiter, RTL. And as I move the button on the radio also makes an announcement. Loiter, stabilize, loiter, RTL. So the radio is saying what it wants, what it's asking the controller to do, and the controller is saying, yes, I'm going to do what you want. So that confirms that. Now go to the data tab to make sure it's actually doing it. Go to the data. This is like your flight panel. And over on the right, it says RTL. And then you can see as I move it, it's changing the mode. So that's telling you the mode of the drone at this time. Okay, we did that. Go to the, now, here's another trick. If you have the mission planner controlled, you can have the mission planner talk to you. Because when you're a pilot, you don't want to be doing all this configure stuff. You want the machines talking to you and telling you what's going on. You want as much information and as little distraction as you can. You don't want to be digging through menus when you're flying your drone. So mission planner also can talk to you, just like the radio. So we're going to make that work. So we go to Config tab and Planner. So this configures how Mission Planner works. And we want to enable the Mission Planner to talk to you. Yes. And what is he going to tell you? What is she going to tell you? Arm, disarm for sure. Arm, disarm. And mode, we definitely want that. Okay. And that should be done. Click Enable Speech. Turn up the volume on your computer. Okay, that's done. And now we'll check. I'm going to change the flight mode.
Mode change to loiter.
Now you see the radio talks and the mission planner talks.
Mode change to RTL. Mode change to loiter. Mode change to stabilize.
Disconnected. Okay, I'm going to reconnect it.
Mode change to stabilize.
I sometimes have a problem with the USB cable not being a good cable. All right. Luckily, we're almost done. So now the flight modes are working. We confirmed that the radio switches change the flight modes. Mission planner gives you a verbal announcement. The radio gives you a verbal announcement. If you're flying, you don't have the USB cable, but later in the course, I'll show you how to connect the drone with Wi-Fi. And so you can, if you want, have Mission Planner connected to the drone while it's in the air, and then Mission Planner will talk to you. All right. Now, the last thing is arming. So it's a long journey, but arming obviously is very important. So let's go back to Mission Planner, config, setup. So what does the instructions say? It says go to the config tab, all parameters, search RC7. So config, full parameter list, RC7. That is radio control channel 7, which is going to be our ARM channel. So we want to go to option, RC option. The value should be 153. That's a bit mask that tells you what channel 7 does. These are all different things channel 7 can do. We want it to arm disarm, 4.2 and higher because we're running 4.5. So that confirms that the flight controller on the drone is using channel 7 as its arm disarm channel. And then it should arm and disarm. So let's try it. I'm going to make it armed.
Warning. Arming checks disabled. Armed.
Hear it beep.
Warning. Arming checks disabled.
A lot of beeping going on here. You can hear the motor spinning. Let's do disarm.
Disarmed.
So let me talk you through that. When I press the arm button on the radio said armed. That means it's requesting the arm. Mission Planner said warning arming checks disabled because you can make it in Mission Planner so that it won't arm unless a certain checks are required, like GPS lock or other things. So we're allowing you as the pilot to arm it. There's no safety checks. So that's on you to make sure you're arming it in a safe environment. So it warns you there's no checks. Then it arms and it says armed. And then you hear the flight controller go, eh. That means warning. That's a beeper on the flight controller saying, warning, I'm about to arm. And then you hear the motor spin up. So let's do that again.
Warning. Arming checks disabled. Armed.
And the motor spin.
Warning. Arming checks disabled.
So now it's
Disarmed.
Now, if you don't throttle right away, it's going to automatically disarm because it thinks you don't want to fly. So as a safety precaution, it disarms if the motors aren't used for a certain period after you arm it. That's a configuration in the file. It sounded to me like it was a few seconds. Now we'll disarm it. There it is, disarmed. So we do it one more time. I'm going to arm it. You'll hear all those things together. Radio saying armed. Mission Planner complaining that there's no flight checks. Mission Planner saying armed. The beeper on the drone going, eh, which is a warning you're about to arm. And the motor's spinning up. You don't want it at full throttle, but even at zero throttle, the motors start to spin. Here we go.
Warning. Arming checks disabled. Armed. Warning. Arming checks disabled.
Now, if the props were on, I could throttle.
Disarmed.
But I didn't throttle it up, so it disarmed it for me. And also on the data panel, it says, this is obviously very important. So it says disarmed. I can go
Warning.
armed,
Arming checks disabled. Armed.
disarmed. So it's
Disarmed.
the biggest thing on the panel.
Warning. Arming checks disabled.
Okay. So now we're done. One last little thing is to calibrate it. So it's a good idea to calibrate the radio. This is more for airplanes where you want to get the rudder right in the middle or the elevator right in the middle. But I don't know how important it is for drones, but we're going to do it anyway. So we're going to click calibrate radio. It says ensure your transmitter is on, the receiver is powered and connected. Ensure your motor does not have power onto props. Okay, that's what I said. So it says click OK and move all the RC6 and switches. So click them, and we just move them all to their extremes. And this calibrates.
Mode change to RTL. Mode change to stabilize. Warning, arming checks disabled.
And it tells you the min-max PWM effective. It's virtual at this point, that it's used, and it's going to store that. I don't know how it's used. Like I said, I don't think it's that important for drones. For airplanes, it's important. And we're going to do it for good measure. Okay, so that's it. Congratulations. You have the radio completely configured. You have the drone configured to arm, disarm, change flight modes, fly. And so we're ready to continue in the next video. So to be continued.